In this video, I want to talk a little bit about technique. For the most part, if you ever hear me talk about technique, I'm going to say it's the most important thing that you should be focusing on a regular basis. In fact, if you're going into the gym, you're looking to get stronger, you're looking to build muscle, much of your focus should be on technique. Now, there are times when technique is going to break down, and I'm going to talk through them today, and hopefully I can give you a little bit of an understanding around when technique is going to break down and when you might necessarily need to reduce the amount of weight that you're actually doing. Because if we think of strength on one end of the continuum and technique on the other one, as we move closer and closer to our maximal strength, it's going to be more and more difficult to maintain good technique through that. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that we just go right to the end of the continuum when we're focusing on strength and throw technique out the window. Everything that we do on a daily basis should be focused on good technique. So that means that whether you're working with the barbell or whether you're working with 100 kilos, you're focusing on the quality of your movement every single time. One of the things that I would always see as a personal trainer, when I'd go into the gym, I would see people doing an exercise class, and this is probably the first failure in technique that I would often see, and it's a fatigue failure. So when someone is doing, let's say, a bodyweight squat and they're doing multiple reps, they've got 30 seconds to do as many reps as they can. As that person starts off, usually you'll find that the technique is really, really good, but as that person gets tired, the muscles become more and more fatigued, they shorten that movement but still think they're doing the same movement. As someone squats down, usually you try and keep your torso upright, but what they end up doing is they bend the knees ever so slightly, and then the movement happens as a hinge from the hips. So it kind of turns that bodyweight squat into kind of an RDL, so that you'd find that the chest was basically kissing the tops of the thighs. And a lot of people think that they're doing the right thing when they're doing this, or oftentimes I would mention to them that the technique is broken down and they need to cool it down a bit, but they're like, but I'm still moving. Yeah, you are still moving, but your technique needs to be better, because when you progress onto lifting weights, if that was something that you wanted to do, your technique is going to be in a worse off position than if you focused on the quality of your movement. So much of the time I will always stick with saying, right, the quality of your movement needs to be better. Now, let's say for instance you're looking at pushing a maximal lift, or you're working at a higher intensity than normal. Let's say you're doing a back squat. Now, if you're doing a back squat and you're working at around 80 to 85%, you can expect some technique breakdown. Now, if you're just doing one rep at 80% or 85%, you might be able to maintain really good technique in doing that. But as you do more and more reps, that fatigue factor is going to set in, but you're also going to have the neurological factors from doing the strength that is going to cause your muscles to find the path of least resistance. So what you might find here, if you're doing an 85% squat, is you squatting to the bottom, your first rep is absolutely fine, but then your second rep, your knees come in ever so slightly. If this happens slightly and you're able to control it and you're able to just gently push them knees out a little bit, then you can continue with that. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It is something that we do need to address, but it's not going to be a bad thing in the short term. Obviously, if that becomes more and more prominent when you're doing squats later on, when we're working at 90%, you find your knees collapsing all of the time, then we need to take it back a couple of steps and start focusing on the technique again. When it comes down to technique and when it comes down to strength training, yes, most of your movement, most of the skill acquisition that you're going to get is going to come from the quality of the movement that you do, from the technique that you practice day in, day out. Now, if you're practicing that with a weight, or if you're doing a lift in the gym and you find that your technique breaks down, if your knees are coming together, if your hips are coming up a little bit too fast, then it might be time to reduce that weight, particularly if you're doing more and more reps or you feel it pulling in certain areas, namely the back, or your hips just don't feel comfortable, you're starting to get twinges down your legs or anything like that. It might be time to reduce the weight and focus on the technique. The main thing that you need to focus on with any type of gym training, if you're looking to get better, is going to be the consistency of what you're doing. Now, a lot of people think that, right, if I'm squatting 50 kilos this week, next week I need to be squatting 55 kilos. But as that goes up and up and up, the percentage of increase over the course of 4 weeks is going to be absolutely massive. Because if you put 5 kilos on every single week for 4 weeks, that's going to be 20 kilos increase, which is pretty much nearly 50% increase on what you were doing the first week, and your body's not going to be able to adapt that fast. So you just need to give yourself a little bit more time to focus on what you're doing. So if you do 55 kilos one week, then 55 kilos the next week, the week after that you might reduce the number of reps that you're going to do, and you're able to maintain 55 kilos, but you're focused on your technique and you're still getting that stimulus to the body, so you're going to adapt it and your body's going to be able to push itself much further for much longer. Just depends on what your overall goal is, the type of training that you're doing. Yes, I'd say probably 75-80% of the time technique is going to be absolutely paramount. If someone's technique is terrible when they're going in, when they're starting off warming up, then they shouldn't be working up to that 80 or 85%. The biggest question you probably got to answer if you're looking to build strength is that on that day, how do you feel? How do you feel in terms of your mobility, your flexibility? When you start off doing that movement, if you feel like you've got a niggle or something like that, then you probably shouldn't be pushing towards that top drop weight, and you should focus on just the quality of movement until you get over those niggles, those pains, until you find that your movement is much better. If you've got any questions about this or anything else, please let me know in the comments below. Fire me across any questions that you may have, just so that I can get an understanding, that you understand where I'm coming from with this. So just to reiterate, technique is the most important thing when it comes to training in the gym, particularly if you're focused on longevity. If you're going to be doing some form of strength training, and if you're going to be working at 80% plus, then you can expect to find some technical breakdown. Now, if you're working with higher reps but you're not at 80%, then you need to primarily focus on your technique. And again, if that's breaking down, then you need to think about either taking a rest, reducing the number of reps that you're doing within that set, or to reduce the weight overall so that you can maintain good technique. And that's what's going to help you continue pushing within the gym. Hopefully you found this helpful. Anyway, I will catch you on the next one.